Welcome to the Short Term Show, the show about short-term rentals and long-term wealth, with real property owners hosting real properties who are crushing it in the vacation and short-term rental space. And here's your host, Avery Carl.
This episode of the Short Term Show is brought to you by the Short Term Shop. If you're interested in buying a short-term rental in one of the top vacation markets in America, just go to theshorttermshop.com and click Get Connected with an Agent. If you purchase a home with the shop, you'll have access to all of our client-only benefits, such as training on how to manage your short-term rental. So we'll teach you everything you need to know, from how to set up your Airbnb and Vrbo listings, to how to use the property management software that you'll need to streamline your business, all the way down to helping you source your local boots on the ground, like cleaners, handy people, etc. We've taught thousands of people just like you how to buy and manage their vacation homes from anywhere in the world. So head on over to theshorttermshop.com and click Get Connected with an Agent to get started. I do have to mention that we're brokered by EXP, or else I get in trouble. We'll see you guys over there. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Short Term Show. I'm very excited about today's guest because I keep seeing questions about this platform on our Facebook groups, and that platform is Breezeway. And so I'm really excited to have Koryn Okey, the VP of Client Experience at Breezeway, on today to help us learn exactly what it does, the best way to utilize that tool, all that fun stuff. Hey Koryn, how's it going? You want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here and chat with your audience and tell them a little bit more about what we're doing at Breezeway. For a little bit of background, I've been in this industry since 2008. I started at a little company called Flipkey back in the day. And we were really sort of one of the first companies that brought guest reviews into the short-term rental space, and ultimately ended up getting acquired by TripAdvisor. But I spent about 7.5 years there working with folks who were handling all of the rentals and helping them with review responses and things like that. And then I've been at Breezeway for the last little over 6 years and worn a bunch of hats. But I think this is such a special industry, and I'm so excited to be able to chat with you and share some of the knowledge I've acquired over the last 15 years or so.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear about this. I always wondered what happened to Flipkey. I never took the time to just go look to see that it was acquired by someone, but I remember it existed when I first started, and then it just kind of disappeared.
Yep. When we built the business, I was one of the first 10 employees that started, and the founder of that company, Jeremy, one of the founders, there were three. Jeremy Gall is also the founder of Breezeway today. So that's sort of how I made the progression. But when I started working with them, we were operating only in the US. And by the time we ended, we were operating and working with folks across the country. So they just sort of merged that into, I think now it's on TripAdvisor under like the alternative accommodations. They may still have the VR category. I'm not entirely sure what they did, but I left in 2015. So.
Okay. Yeah. And I appreciate you being flexible with me today, guys. I have to address my background. My son was sent home sick from school today. He's down for a nap right now, but I'm in my home office / workout room / storage room. So I don't have my whole pro set up, and I was a few minutes late for Koryn. So I appreciate you being flexible with that. So let's jump into Breezeway. So I think a lot of people mistakenly think that Breezeway is a property management software like a Hospitable or something like that. So let's start at the very beginning. Tell us exactly what Breezeway is.
Yeah. So we pride ourselves on being really niche focused, specifically around operations and sort of guest communication. So at Breezeway, we have a handful of products. We started the business with our operations, our operations tool. And so what that means is that through utilization of Breezeway, you can actually create templates so that you can standardize the work that's being done at your homes. And then you can have automation around the scheduling of work, communication with the housekeeper or a handyman or an inspector that may be going out and looking and caring for the home. So our operations product really allows you to tailor the work that's being done to the individual like needs and just, differential attributes of the home, while creating a communication program back and forth. And so it's a lot less of the, I'm just waiting on my cleaner to call me to tell me that the property's ready, and more visibility into, okay, the cleaner's been in the home for 2.5 hours. I know it's a 3-hour clean. They should be pretty close. And then getting notifications when that work is done. And then as the company has evolved and we've continued to build and add enhancements to the product, we have a guest communication tool. So we have an SMS messaging with all sort of automation around different points of the guest stay. My colleague Justin Ford runs our safety and certification program. So we're really, heavily invested in making sure that not only are houses clean and welcoming and ready for your guests, but that they're also safe for them to come into. And then we recently launched our fourth product, which is a guide, which is sort of a welcome book, digital guidebook for guests as they're experiencing your properties. So we sort of do a lot, but it's all really tailored around making sure that the home is ready and that you're communicating effectively for all of the different aspects that play into that.
Let's start at the beginning. So Breezeway is kind of a tool where all of your vendors can kind of live and communicate and checklist and things like that. Let's start with cleaners, because I think that's the vendor that most people deal with the most and the most often. So what does Breezeway do in terms of streamlining not only communication with your cleaner, but I know that they can put pictures of when they leave and all that. So let's just go through the bullet points of what it does with the cleaner.
Yeah. So basically from the cleaner, like I mentioned earlier, right, you're going to create your template. So if you have one property, you're doing what you need to do and you're sort of building that template for that particular home. But if you have 3, 4, 5 properties or even more than that, right, there are different attributes of those homes that exist. So one of the things that happens for folks who often are not using Breezeway is I build this checklist of what I want the cleaner to do. And then the cleaner goes out and it says, clean the shower in the bathroom, and they're in a powder room, right, that doesn't have one. And you're saying, okay, well, just check it off because it exists. You cleaned the bathroom. But what we're also sort of saying is that like accountability piece is missing, because now we're saying, tell me you did something that you didn't do. And with Breezeway, the checklists actually become tailored to that home and what is actually relevant. So when a cleaner is going through and saying, I did this, I cleaned I emptied the dishwasher, I reran it, I did whatever, we as an operator and a short-term rental host can know that was actually done. And so from a cleaner perspective, not only is it giving sort of the direction and the most important pieces of what needs to be done when they're in the home, but it's also ensuring that they're not missing anything. So if they're asked about a game room and they didn't go up to the top floor of the house, they may have missed that, right? And so it's sort of driving and creating accountability for that. But it's also putting it into their hands in a really easy way so that they're getting jobs that are assigned to them that they can actually see and view and complete in real time on their mobile device. So every user of Breezeway has their own login. So they're going to receive work and we notify them, when you say, hey, I've got a new reservation that comes in and Koryn is the cleaner, Koryn is going to get a notification that there is a property that needs a clean on X date. I'm going to be able to open up my mobile app and see everything that I actually need to do on that clean at that property. And then you as the host are able to see, when did Koryn start the clean? When did Koryn finish the clean? How long did it take? Did they find any issues? Because another challenge that cleaners often have is, okay, I found these 3 things that were wrong or broken or aren't in the house that are supposed to be there. And there's a lot of sort of, there's just a lot of sort of responsibility of the cleaner to not only go in and clean, but also to be the eyes and ears, and then remember to communicate all of that back to you. And so within the mobile app, as they're completing that checklist, they can also say, hey, there's a broken dishwasher, or the coffee maker is not working, or, the coffee pot is broken, or whatever that may be, and easily report that information back to you so that they can really focus on doing the clean and then communicating versus having to do the clean, remember it, and call you and tell you that it's done.
Yeah. So you know what this reminds me of? And this is, everybody's going to be like, this has nothing to do with anything, but in my brain, it makes sense. So for me, when Calendly came out, that made my world so much easier because I could say, oh, schedule a meeting with me instead of, 10 people calling me in a 3 or 4 hour period. And then I'm in the middle of something and then I have to go back and remember to call them all back and schedule them. And once you start implementing an app like that, where you just click or you just make a note at the time and you're not having to stop what you're doing and go into something else and remember to do things after, because you got to prioritize getting the clean done after you're done with it, then remembering like, oh, I'm really tired from cleaning this house and I forgot to mention that the car broken. So I think that it really is, I think, game changing if you can get people to implement it. And for me, I think too, that a lot. So in the markets that I'm in, they're very, very vacation rental heavy. So I own in the Smokies in Tennessee, the Emerald Coast of Florida, everything in those markets are vacation rental. So in terms of finding cleaners, they know what they're doing. It's not like going into a metro market where you might have to hire a cleaner who's used to cleaning primary homes. And then you really have to give them a checklist and show them how to turn a vacation rental. But I think where this can start to get in those markets where they all basically do all the same tasks and they have for 20 years and they know what they're doing, is if you start to implement things like a gift basket or, other things aside from just the cleaning to help them remember that they might not be doing in every single property. So things you're doing to set your property, like to make it stand out. Yeah. I think that that's especially helpful too. And so what are your tips? I've got 1,000 questions, so I'm all over the place. I think the difficult part, at least in the markets that I'm in, where the cleaners are very set in their ways, do you have any tips for getting them to implement these things? Because I could see mine, who I love my cleaner so much, she's one of my favorite people. But she would probably throw my phone back in my face in the Smokies. My cleaner in the Emerald Coast would totally do it. She loves that kind of thing. But the one in the Smokies would probably throw my phone in my face. So what tips do you have for dealing with, people have been doing things a certain way for a long time and implementing something like this that will be really beneficial, but getting them to implement that?
Yeah. Well, so I think one of the things which you sort of mentioned when you were talking about Calendly, and I wanted to just piggyback on, which segues into this answer as well, but is reservations change, right? So you have somebody who maybe wants to extend or maybe shortens, or a reservation cancels altogether. Within our system, right, that automation is happening. So when we know that reservation is off the calendar, so does the cleaner, right? So does anybody else who's scheduled to do work there. And so I think that, the ease and sort of the lack of having to make myself a to-do list of the things that I need to do is huge there. But I think, going back to your question around how to get adoption in the field, I think at the end of the day, it's the biggest way that I've seen people have success is to get the buy-in early, right? To understand, to understand what the pain points that the cleaner has today are, and make sure that Breezeway or any tool that you're using, right? Even if it's not around cleaners, but the person who's going to use it at the end of the day is actually, it's going to make their job easier instead of harder. And so getting that buy-in as you're initially evaluating a solution is incredibly important. But I also think explaining to them that you're already doing this, but I'm giving you a piece of paper that you have to remember, that you have to carry around with you, that may or may not be tailored to the property you're actually cleaning. And, oh, by the way, that owner added in a hot tub and it's not on our list, but you need to remember that you need to go and do this, right? Reminding them that we're not giving you a tool like Breezeway to make your job harder. We're actually giving it to you so that there's less that you need to remember outside of what you need to do, right? All I need to do is open this up and this app is going to tell me exactly what we need to do. And I think, from a from a cleaner perspective, right? That allows me to be successful and to know that what I'm delivering is what the operator wants, right? Because I mean, all of those markets, Gatlinburg's, the Panhandle, all of that, right? Inundated with vacation rentals and inundated with people who service those properties. But what you want done might be different than what the person down the street wants versus what someone else does. And so, helping to make sure that like it's very fluid and there's clear communication, and also like a little bit of CYA, right? Like you want the cleaner to be able to say, hey, no, I did these things and I took these pictures. And some guests, we're not gonna stereotype all guests, but some guests are sneaky, right? I've heard stories around somebody coming in and making a big dinner and then calling and saying the kitchen is disgusting. It looks like it wasn't even clean. And in reality, the guest had a great feast in the house and then was calling to ask for it to be cleaned. And so, showing and being able to take photographs of your completed work makes it so that when that scenario happens, I can say, really, Mr. Guest, because I'm actually looking at the pictures our cleaners took. And again, you don't want to be doing this in any sort of a combative way, but being able to say like, it looks like it was really clean. Like our team came in. Sometimes that sort of reduces the conversation that needs to happen there.
Yeah. Like, oh yeah, somebody broke in and made dinner in between.
Right, and between 4:00 and 7:00. But I think from a cleaner perspective, right, making sure that it's easy for them to use. I know very early on, one of the challenges that we saw was that in some scenarios, right, there's a language barrier, right? And I'm going to put my checklist in English and my cleaner speaks great English, but maybe they don't read great English, or they have a preferred language that they actually would be more comfortable operating in. And so, at Breezeway, we went in and we actually offer translation services within the app, so that if you do prefer Spanish or Portuguese or French or Italian or whatever that might be, they can actually use the app in the language that's going to be most comfortable. Because again, it's not about making it giving them more work. It's about making their job easier, and also creating that visibility where you're not calling and saying, hey, Avery, are you at the house? Hey, Avery, how much longer are you going to be there? Hey, Avery, the inspector wants to come by. Is it ready? Like, we're sort of reducing that back and forth and sort of that burden to the cleaner by providing them with touch points that happen automatically just by the virtue of them completing their work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I really do like the picture thing, because like you said, there are guests and every now and then who will come in and like put hair in the drain, or like on the drain, or in the bed, or they'll bring in a bug from outside and say, oh, there's bugs in here. So I think that it's for the cleaner's protection as much as anyone else's, so they can say, no, I did do my job. Here's the timestamped photos of what it looked like. And even from a liability standpoint. So if somebody says, oh, I slipped and fell on the deck because there was ice on the deck. And if they took a picture of whatever they cleaned on the deck that day and that there's not, hey, that helps, and it's timestamped. You're out of that, not necessarily out of that liability, but it's much more difficult to prove that there was any sort of negligence there. So I think that's really, really powerful.
Well, I think too, right? If it depends on, right, there's different levels of cleaners. And when I say levels, I don't mean like skill levels, but like there are some people that are like an individual, right? So you're going to assign me a clean and I'm going to be the person that actually goes and does that clean. There are others where you're going to assign it to John, and John has 30 cleaners who are going to go do that. And specifically in that scenario, we have a user role within Breezeway that we call a service partner. And that service partner can have an account where you are assigning the work to John, and then John can distribute that out to his team. So now all of a sudden, not only do you have visibility into it, but John has a system that's available to him at no charge, where he can actually better manage his team of cleaners as well. So, when you think about how do you get that adoption, it's really about understanding how the user is going to use it, getting their buy-in, and making sure that like they feel comfortable with that. There's also a little bit of like, of reliance on especially, in both of those markets that you mentioned, the Smokies specifically, right? Like Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, like some of those homes like are up on the mountain and there's bad cell reception. And so there's sort of an assumption that using my mobile phone is not going to work, right? And so educating the cleaner on the value that an app like this can bring is huge, because our app has offline functionality. So even if they're completely out of service, or they're on airplane mode because they're trying to save their phone battery, they can still do their work, and then it will sync up when they come back into connectivity. So, just sort of communicating with the end user, I think is huge, because there's a lot of assumptions that can be made incorrectly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And so I have another question about cleaners before we'll move on to a different vendor. So is this set up where, like, you use the Smokies as an example, Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, even though they're not that far from each other, in the summertime, in the high season, it can take 2 hours to get from Gatlinburg to Pigeon Forge, which is like 10 miles on the parkway, because it's so crowded. So we have to have 2 separate cleaners for our different properties. So is Breezeway set up to where you can have separate cleaners for separate properties, or is it all up?
Oh, no. Yeah. You can set up deep. So there's a ton of things specifically in those types of markets where, I remember staying in a house once. It was like, oh yeah, it's 2 miles from town, but it takes, 30 minutes to get there because you're winding up and down a hill. Yeah, so there's a couple ways that can be addressed. We have what we call default cleaners. So I would be the default person on this house. And then all of the work that needs to be done at that house would go to me. So that can happen. Of course, default cleaners can be amended on a one-off basis, or any sort of a need, or like, hey, if you have 7 homes and 5 of them are turning over and I happen to be the cleaner on 4 of the 5, I probably can't do 4 big house cleans in a day. Maybe 4 condos, but likely not houses. So you can adjust that as you need to. But the other thing that's pretty cool is, as an operator and a short-term rental host, you're going to have the ability to see where your team is if they're using the app on a map. So let's say that you have 7 properties and 5 of them turn over and 2 of them are vacant for tonight, but then you get a last minute booking if you accept those, and you need to send somebody over to do a touch-up clean on a property, right? Maybe the house has been empty for 2 weeks and you just need somebody to go in. The Smokies, the ladybugs are always the big thing, right? The ladybugs come in and we're not doing anything to get rid of them, right? And so you want to send somebody over to do a touch up. You can look on a map and actually see where your users are, to say, hey, you know what? Avery is closest. I'm going to call her. I'm going to send this job over to her and add a note to let her know that, when she finishes this, if she could just go over and do that clean next, because we have a last minute booking. So as the person sort of running and making sure that all the pieces move together in that day, you've got visibility to where everyone is in the moment.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That.
Yeah. And it's also good for, like, I know we were talking specifically about cleaners, but that's also really good from a maintenance perspective, right? If there is a last minute or urgent maintenance issue, and you have people who are already out working in some of your properties, you can sort of direct them to the closest person to that home that needs the attention.
Well, that's a really good segue into my next question. So what other types of vendors, besides the obvious cleaners, can benefit, or can a host benefit from having used this tool? Hey guys, if you're enjoying the content of our podcast, but you have additional short-term rental questions, we host a weekly live question session that you guys can join for free. It's at 1 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays. And if you head over to strquestions.com, you can sign up. So not only am I the host of this show, but I also own and manage my own properties, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about short-term rental investing. So please join us anytime for a free weekly live Q&A on Zoom. Sign up at strquestions.com.
So we have, it's wild what some folks have done and how they're utilizing it. Some people are using it because they manage a building, right? And they're cleaning common areas of the building. But some people use it for like their handyman, or if they're working with a local property manager, or they have sort of a co-host in the area, right? To say like, hey, we need to go meet the cable company, or we have a hot water, we have maintenance stuff coming in. But primarily, we see people using the system from a cleaning, inspection, and maintenance perspective. Again, I think when we talk about maintenance, right, do I think you're going to send a task to your HVAC vendor and be like, you need to complete this job in Breezeway? I mean, some, right? If you give them a ton of business, but for the most part, that HVAC vendor is like, cool, give me the job and send it to me. And we have some unique ways that can be done in Breezeway. But really, these are people that are going in, and they're your handyman, the folks who are actually going to be, taking care of any issues that arise from a broken or not working appliance or item perspective.
Okay, gotcha. And let's talk about integrations for a minute. So what property management software does Breezeway integrate with?
Oh my gosh, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's like over 30, maybe 35 property management systems. And so, the way that the integrations happen does sort of vary a little. Like some of them are more robust than others. But in all of the integrations, we are receiving property information and reservation information. So, if you use a PMS that we are integrated with, you will be able to have all of your reservations flow over. And so that means that as changes and adjustments to the reservation are happening, those are being updated within Breezeway as well. And so in many cases, we have a lot of one-way integrations, but for some, we have two-way integrations. And so that means that we can push work orders back into the PMS. And that's good from like an accounting perspective, or, billing and things like that, because we don't actually handle anything with like the money per se, about like, paying people out, right? We are going to give you the information to track what needs to be paid. And that's another, going back, Avery, to your first question, a benefit of the cleaners is you no longer have to tell me what cleans you did last week. I know, because I can see what was completed via the app. So I know what I need to pay you. You don't have to send me an invoice any longer. So again, taking something away that may have been, taking up their time prior to incorporating Breezeway.
Okay, that's awesome. So it integrates with all, but not all, I'll say most of the major property management software. And is this something that's just like on a cleaner's app on their phone that they can just, when they're taking the pictures, they can just go into the app and take the pictures on the app? They're not having to upload it from somewhere else into the app.
Correct. Yeah. So they're going to get the job that you've got to clean at ABC property. Here's the address. It's this type of clean. Is there a guest coming in? Is there a guest leaving? You can get directions to the property directly from the mobile app, and then you can start it and complete those requirements. So again, depending on the way that you interact with your cleaner, it may be 5 really vague questions. It may be 15 really very specific questions, but directly from the mobile app, I'm going to be able to, yes, I did this. Yes, I did this. Wait, this is broken. I'm going to report an issue, and I can take a picture right from my mobile device, and that's loaded in. And then when I'm done with the clean, let's say that you are a remote host, right? Let's say that you don't live in Gatlinburg, and you get a message that, hey, this clean is completed. You can actually go through on your phone, and there's a report that is generated with all of the photos, with the notes, with any details that were left by the cleaner when they're in there. But yes, they're doing everything directly from their phone. They're getting notifications. Those can be sent via email, via text. We can also do push notifications on the device, but the individual is going to be able to control how they want to receive communication from us.
All right. And you mentioned offline, I think, guest communication. So what would it be communicating with a guest?
Yeah. So, well, there's a couple of ways. So we have our messaging program. And so this is a scenario where I often recommend, if you do not work with an integrated PMS, you can still use it. And I'm not trying to deter people from using it, but it's not quite as robust as if you work with an integration, because when we have an integration with a PMS, not only are we getting arrival and departure information, but we know what unit they're in. We have the guest's phone number, we have their name, and you can create a bunch of messages that you want to be sent out to that guest at different touch points within their stay, right? So maybe 2 days before or the day before, you want to send them a reminder email about check-in time, giving them the address, maybe any special instructions for how to get there. And then the day after, and I love this, I think if people aren't doing this, even if you're not doing it through Breezeway, but like if you're not doing this, the day after check-in, create an easy touch point with the guest so that they can give you feedback if something is wrong. So often, the mindset is the guest has arrived, they're going to tell me if something is wrong. And that is definitely the case, but it's not the case 100% of the time. There are people that go in and they're like, oh, the toaster's broken. Well, that's okay. We don't eat bread anyway. So like, it's fine, right? Like we don't need to worry about that. And so as an operator, you have no visibility into that happening until the next guest who needs to make their kids toast in the morning freaks out at 7 a.m. because the toaster is broken. So when you provide an opportunity for that guest to tell you things, even if it isn't going to impact their stay, the amount of feedback that people are getting by saying, how is everything? Is there anything that's not working? Is there anything that we need to address? You're opening the door for them to share that information with you. And so I highly, highly recommend, checking in the day after arrival with your guests so that you have that open way of communication. But outside of that, people are also sending reminders about checkout instructions. They're encouraging their guests to actually tell them when they leave. So in a lot of markets, specifically drive markets, right? People are up and leaving at 7, 8 o'clock. And in many instances, we don't know that unless the guest tells us. So a lot of our clients actually, they send a reminder the night before that says, we hope you had a great stay. Just a reminder, checkout is 10 a.m. Here's, a link to what you need to do. And like, oh, if you happen to head out early, just respond with checkout and we'll, and that'll allow us to come in and start cleaning early so that the next guest can get in, whatever you want to say there, right? But what that does is that potentially extends the window for you to clean that property. So if you have that scenario where you've got 5 turnovers, getting that extra 2 hours is huge to just keep everybody's sanity in the day. So our messaging, you have those different touch points. They're all custom based on when you want them to go out. We also have, as I said, that checkout feature. We have bulk messages. So, if there's high winds or if there's an outage of water or electricity, you can communicate to everybody really easily. You're also working off of a number that is not your personal cell phone number, meaning that if you want to actually go on vacation, you can give that, you can have somebody else responding to those and actually be able to have a couple of days where they're not calling you or bothering you when you're at church or whatever that might be. The other thing with our messaging product is gap nights. So it's a really great way to fill some of those vacant nights. And that's all can be set up through automation and gives you, again, some additional touch points with the guest without you or someone that you work with manually making those touch points.
Yeah. And I think too, a little more like on the negative side of guests is sometimes they don't tell you that something's broken the entire stay. And then it shows up in your review and you get 3 or 4 stars because something was broken. So it's really good to get ahead of that and have an app check in and say, hey, what is there? What can we fix?
Yeah. And I think it's when what we've seen a lot is that when you create that, and again, this may be a negative, right? So you kind of want to think about how you're phrasing it, but like, there's just a lot more interaction and people are sharing pictures and you have that touch point that like, they're just more open and they're more willing. They feel like they have a more personal connection. And, you know, it's really hard to do if you're doing it all manually or, you're doing it from your personal phone because you really are there. I will say one of the things that people like the most about our messaging is that you can set up out of office. Everybody that's listening to this has had the guest who's called at midnight because the blender is not working or, whatever the non-emergency that they think is an emergency, that they're reaching out. And one of the things that's really cool about our messaging program is that you can actually set away hours. So if you don't want to have to respond to guests after 10 o'clock or after 9 o'clock or whatever that is for you, you can set that up and they're getting an automated message that says, hey, thanks for reaching out. Like, we're actually like having a little personal time, or we're not working. Our office is closed, right? Like however you want to communicate that, to say, if this is an emergency, call this number, and that's your after hours number. And it sort of makes that guest be like, is this really an emergency? Like, do I really need to call them to tell? Okay, I'll wait until tomorrow, right? And so what we've seen that do is cut down on a lot of sort of frivolous after hours calls, because people they don't think they're on vacation. They think we're here to be like available to them 24 hours a day. And when you sort of put that pause in there, people are like, oh yeah, it is 11 o'clock at night. I didn't even realize. And so it really creates a little bit more space to set some boundaries with your guests as well.
Yeah, I think you definitely need that. We have office hours that we set up so that after a certain hour, like, we're not responding. And if you need the police, call them. But if it's anything short of like a major maintenance emergency, we're not responding until in the morning.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, we've all been there, right? You're on vacation. You're like, I really need this thing. And you don't even, you really often don't. I think maybe I'm giving people more benefit of the doubt than I should, but like, I don't think they're trying to be like annoying. I think they're just on vacation and they're like, and again, I think we talk about this a lot, but there's a new traveler persona coming into the short-term space, right? And these are a lot of hotel guests who call down to the front desk at 2 a.m. and all of a sudden 10 more towels appear 30 minutes later, right? So we've got to set the expectation for those guests that, hey, this is not, the Hilton, right? You're going to get a way better experience, but you're not going to get towels delivered to you at 2 a.m.
Yeah, exactly. It is a different thing than a hotel for sure. So you guys also, changing gears, just added another tool to the platform, a guidebook. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we just launched the product. It's called Guide. And one of the things that we hear so often is there's a lot of the same questions that are coming, right? People have questions about the property. People have questions about the checkout process or whatever that is. And so rather than have your team fielding a lot of those questions, we created our Guide product. And again, if you are integrated, we know where the guest is in that stay. So again, when you use our messaging product, these two go really well hand in hand, because the day before arrival, they're getting their guide and it's saying, here's your check-in time, here's this, here's the directions to the property, all in one link to basically a profile of that home that the guests can access. And then while they're there and during their stay, they're seeing information about the house and about how to do things and where items may be located or how to reset the router or whatever that might be. And then as that stay is ending, they're starting to see information about checkout. So what time is checkout? What are the checkout instructions? What needs to be done? How do you let us know that you've checked out if that's something that you do? So we're seeing, this is something that is again, saving time and reducing a lot of the redundancy that happens with guest questions, right? Because you know it and you're like, oh my gosh, of course you reset the router this way, but they're like, oh, this is totally different than what we have at home. So instead of having to consistently answer that, you can just proactively give that information and then reference the guide, during the stay if an issue does come up.
Yeah, guidebooks are just so helpful. Like, we just got back from a vacation in Montana, and it was a property management company, but I did book it on Airbnb, and hosts make the worst guests, and I'm about to just like embody that, but it's okay. And I noticed they weren't using any kind of property management software. They did not have a guidebook. They had we saw it when we got there. They had a binder on the table, but like there was some stuff that I wanted to know, like, well, how far is it from this or that? Just some things that I would have liked to have known on my trip there in terms of, okay, do I need to stop and get groceries first on the way? Because we're getting home, like we're getting there right around bedtime for the kids. So should I put the kids to bed and then get groceries? And the UPS lost my ski pants that I ordered. So I got to go grab some of those. So I would have liked to have some like orientation and know how far things were from each other. But I mean, no big deal. I'm not by any means a needy guest. I figured it out on my own, no problem. But it just would have made things easier. And it's just crazy to me how some big property management, well, they're not big. I would call them still like a boutique property management company. They had like 20 properties, but they were all really high end luxury properties. Like this place had heated toilet seats. And yeah, like that's luxury for a short-term rental. And they just were not using all of this technology that could make the experience for their guests so much better. Not that my experience was bad, 5 stars across the board, but there were just a couple things I noticed that I was like, why are you not using this?
Well, and I think you just sort of hit the nail on the head. That's something that we saw a lot. I'm going to go way, way back 14, 15 years now at Flipkey, right? Like people were collecting guest reviews, and the only way you could see the guest reviews is if you were in the house when you were looking at their guest book, right? And it's sort of the same thing. It's like nowadays we just as a society we want everything immediately. I don't know how many times I'm like, oh, I want to order that on Amazon, but oh, it's not going to be here for 4 days. I'm going to find another one, right? Like I want it fast. And so when you're planning a trip, especially to a place you've not been, the more information that you can have at your fingertips, they probably had all that information once you got into the property and looked at the welcome book, but like you wanted to know that when you were going. And so I think like, adjusting our processes to meet the needs of the guests are what's going to really make a difference. And for us, adding the guide was a bit of a no-brainer because we had so much information about the property already. And we already knew that often that information and the lack of providing it to the guests is what resulted in so many of the operational questions that it just made sense to present and provide a way for folks to present that information to the guests. So we're really excited that the guide is like you said, it's new. We just launched it in February, but already seeing a ton of great adoption and interest. And, again, people just really trying to continue to elevate that experience for the guests. So that they're not asking tedious questions that they could sort of figure out on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like, you guys are covering a lot of ground in terms of tasks and guidebook and guest communication and like all of this. I guess it all falls under the umbrella of operations, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and gosh, there's so much stuff too, Avery, that we didn't even cover, right? Like it is wild sometimes when I look at the product at how far it's come in just 6 years, right? Like the things that I would never have even, maybe somebody was contemplating it, but it wasn't me, 6 years ago on sort of what the needs were, are just wild to look at and how much we've been able to add and build, to make people's lives easier. And I think, as an industry, operators and they're really hungry for technology that's going to make their life easier. And for so long, the operational side, sort of the back of house field staff folks didn't have a lot of focus on that. And so it's really for us super rewarding it's super rewarding to be able to deliver a product that has a really strong impact to our users. And we learn a lot from folks using the product. So
yeah, I think you guys have done a really awesome job.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Koryn. So we are coming to the last 3 questions of the show that we ask every single guest who comes on. And the first one is, what advice would you give 20-year-old Koryn?
Oh, I would say, take the risk. I'm by nature a very like methodical. I process things. I need to sort of make sure that they make sense, and I don't take a lot. I'm not very impulsive, I guess. And when in 2008, I was in a really great steady job, and I had this opportunity to join this tiny startup, and I never. I hemmed and hawed for so long about whether or not this was the right thing, and 15 years later, I'm so glad that I took that. So just take the risk, trust your gut, and know it'll all work out the way it's supposed to.
That's great advice. And next question, very similar to the first question, but a little bit different. What advice do you have for a new short-term rental investor who's interested in getting started today?
One of my favorite things about this industry is the collaboration and how helpful everyone is. So join groups, attend conferences, ask questions, be curious about what you're doing. I don't think I've ever met someone in this space that hasn't been willing to share what they've learned, and what has worked, and also, even equally as important, what hasn't worked. So ask questions, right? Like, it's not always for an investor, it's definitely just, a lot of it's in the numbers, but it's also about understanding the market that you're going to be investing in. And so, build relationships and ask questions with the community, because not only will that make sure that you're getting into something that makes sense, but like, that is what, when as an industry, we face so much regulation and things like that, that's what's going to keep that investment solid for years to come, because you're going to have relationships with those people, to just make sure that you're all working and rowing in the same direction.
Also, really good advice. And last question, a little more fun, a little easier. What's your favorite book?
Oh man, I knew this question was coming. And I can't narrow it down. I should probably really get some points for saying somebody in the industry who's written a book, and giving them a shout out. But I'm going to actually say, I feel like there's so much, we're dealing with so much serious stuff every day. And I love a good, just a good chick lit beach read. And I really love an author named Allison Wynne Scotch. And she just has really good, easy, fun, kind of take your mind out of all the seriousness of what's going on in the world. So I really love pretty much anything by her.
And what was her name? I missed it. What?
Her name is Allison Wynne Scotch.
Okay. And what are some titles by her? I haven't heard of her, but I might have heard of some.
Yeah, she's amazing. So she just recently did a book called The Rewind. She has a book called The Theory of Opposites. She also has a book, and now I'm going to blank on the name of it, but it's in process of being adapted to a screenplay. So,
okay, cool. I'll have to check her out.
Yeah.
Because I've been trying to read more non-business, non-mindset, non-self-improvement books recently, and read more fiction. And so I'm working on that.
I feel like that's it's my guilty pleasure, right? Like that, and reality TV. It's mind numbing. I can do it and do 20 other things at the same time. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Koryn. If any of our listeners want to follow you or Breezeway, or, sign up, find anything out, where can they do that?
So yeah, we are on all of the major social channels. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can also email vip@breezeway.io, and we'll get you directed to the right person. You can visit our website, which is just breezeway.io. It's not breezeway.com, so .io. And, we've got a lot of information there, videos, case studies. We also, if you're trying to figure out, what do you want to be part of your your cleaning checklist or a deep clean checklist or anything like that, we've got a lot of really good resources there that you can download and get access to some of those as well.
Okay. Well, awesome. And thanks again so much for coming on. We'll catch you later.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.